Namaste. Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome to you all to the first edition of the Mangaluru Lit Fest. Let us kickstart this fest by beginning with the first session of the day with the topic Reclaiming the True Hindu Narrative. We have with us esteemed panelists Dr. David Frawley and Dr. Anirban Ganguly. I invite onto the dais Dr. Anirban Ganguly and Dr. Padma Bhushan, Dr. David Frawley. I now request Dr. Ganesh Prasad to introduce the guest.
Padma Bhushan Dr. David Frawley is a renowned American Hindu teacher and author of over 30 books, the most recent being What is Hinduism? A Guide for the Global Mind, which is going to be released tomorrow here. We welcome you, sir. Dr. Anirban Ganguly, Director of Dr. Shyam Prasad Mukherjee Research Foundation. He's a history and political scholar and author of numerous bestsellers like Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, His Vision of Education and Debating Culture. We welcome you, sir. ಸಂವಾದ ಕೊನೆಯ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೋತ್ತರಕ್ಕೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಇರುತ್ತದೆ. ಶ್ರೋತೃಗಳು ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳನ್ನು ಕೇಳಬಹುದು. Now I request Dr. David Frawley to express his views on the topic Reclaiming the True Hindu Narrative.
Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of the Mangaluru Lit Fest for this important event. And it is our honor to be here again, as we have been here a number of times with my wife, Yogini Shambhavi. And I'm also very happy to see these new literary events coming up. I have recently just come from the Bangalore Lit Festival, which has its point of view in various ways, as you know, and does not connect so much with the culture or the traditions here. And I'm also very happy to be with Professor Ganguly again. We had a discussion in Ranchi at Lokmantan just last month. Now, our topic is reclaiming the Hindu narrative, which is a very essential part of this whole Bharatiya narrative. So first of all, let's just take a quick look at what Hindu is. And here we must remember that the tradition here is not one of one name only. So whether we call it Hinduism, Hindu Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, Veda Dharma, Yoga Dharma, Arya Dharma, Manava Dharma, Visual Dharma, we are talking about the same thing. We are not propagating simply a name. And we're also connected to the idea of Bharat. In fact, it's in Rig Veda itself that we first have the term Bharatam Janam, which is protected by the mantras of the rishis. And in this respect, first of all, this came from the mantras of the rishi Vishwamitra, which we can also suggest or connect to Gayatri mantra. And Bharatas were an offshoot of Purus, one of the 5 Vedic people. And they in turn had various offshoots, and one of their main branches was the Kurus, Panchalas. And yet, over time, Bharat became a name for India as a whole, and also indicated those who carry Agni, or sacred fire, and all the aspects of yajna, dharma, sadhana, and so forth. Now, the Hindu narrative also spread, in the Bharat narrative, also spread in many ways throughout the world. We all know how the India's civilization, which is another term for Bharat and the Hindu Dharma, spread throughout Indonesia and Indochina, and also dominated China and Japan or the whole of East Asia. Hindu traditions were very prominent in the southeast, like Angkor Wat, which is the largest Hindu temple in the world. Buddhist, but along with Hindu influences spread through China. Even Japan still worships many Vedic and Hindu deities in the local shrines of the people. Yet, there was also a very profound expansion of the Vedic and Hindu Dharma to the West through Central Asia. We had Indo-Aryan people in Syria and Anatolia in the second millennium BC. And we had this whole idea of Arya Dharma. Arya Dharma being the way of the rishis, the way of noble and enlightened people. Arya Dharma was not just India, it also went as far as Ireland. It also was in Iran. And even people called the Alans, who went with the Germans up to the 6th century, was another term for Aryan. So this is a global heritage that is based upon India or Bharat, or even more specifically took its roots in a lot of the Himalayan regions and also the mountain ranges of India, where the sages, the rishis, the yogis did their sadhana, and from which their different teachings arose. So we also connect Hindu tradition with Vedic tradition, but as Bharadwaj said, Vedas are ananta. They are unlimited. And because of that, we take some mantras like Gayatri mantra, Om, to emphasize them. And we can also say here that there's no division in the Dharmic traditions between Vedic and non-Vedic, because all of them emphasize the meditation, sadhana, spiritual practice, dharmic values, and the terms Arya Dharma, Sanatana Dharma also occur in Buddhist, Jain, Sikh traditions. Dharmic traditions are all one. So if we were to look back at the world 1,500, 2,000 years ago, we would see a continuous spread of these Dharmic and Vedic and related traditions from China all the way through Europe. And then there was a break in the continuity of these traditions, basically through the Christian and then more specifically the Islamic period. And the other different civilizational centers came up and had their ideas. And of course, India came under waves of foreign invasion, extending to different periods of foreign rule, but the Dharmic traditions continued. And in India, there was also a tradition of the Kshatriya Dharma, which did not simply surrender to foreign forces, but always fought to maintain and establish the Dharma. And they continued, and in the end, when the British came to India, it was mainly the Marathas and the Sikhs that the British had to deal with. The Hindu Dharma was already reclaiming its narrative at that particular time. Then, of course, we had the period of the British rule, and as Prafulla so clearly and eloquently explained, the British undermined a lot of the educational aspects and a lot of the foundational aspects of the Hindu culture, and brought in their own views. And even today, it's important to know that because they created the values and the views of the institutions that are still functioning in India today, which includes a lot of the universities, the courts, the political systems, although these have been adjusted in a dharmic or a Bharatiya way to some degree, but not entirely. And then we have the worst form of colonialism came to India after 1947, which is what I would say is the Marxist colonialism. It came in the back door. It did not win an election, but it came in through the educational system, through the media, and through the Nehru dynasty, which used them as its intellectual voice and ended up following their views and prejudices, we could say. So if you look at the textbooks of India today, they still have that Marxist leftist view in which Hindu and Bharatiya traditions are distorted, denigrated, and misrepresented in a politically intentional manner. Then we have to understand that, Hindu Bharata has always had a geographical context via the sacred geography of Bharat. It has never been simply a political state in the sense of modern political states. Actually, no modern political state existed before modern France and England and these things anyway. But India had this dharmic Bharatiya unity, and that has been the foundation of the entire culture and civilization. Now, there is also this debate on what is Hinduism. I have explained this in some detail in the book, in the sense that we unfortunately have to deal with the way terminology is given today. If we had put things in Dharmic or Sanskrit terminology, most of these distortions would disappear. But to put it in the context, we cannot say Hindu Dharma is not a religion, because it contains every aspect of what is called religion, even in the Western world, whether it is monks, whether it is temples, whether it is dealing with issues of immortality, death, whether it is using of mantras and prayers. Sometimes I say there are more religions inside of Hinduism than there are outside of it, because it embraces the full spectrum of the spiritual experience of humanity, which may include using images or not using images, which includes every form and formulation of divinity, male, female, animal, natural, which includes every type of sadhana, and, as Prafulla mentioned, spiritual democracy. What is spiritual democracy? That is when we emphasize individual spiritual experience, anubhava, anubhuti, as the main factor, not a belief from the outside, not a mere name, not accepting I belong to this or that, but having a direct inner experience and realization of the divinity within us as not apart from ourselves, as eventually as our true self, Purusha, Atma. So this is the foundation of the Hindu Dharma, which then requires a yoga sadhana. So it is both a religion in a certain sense, it is also all the spiritual paths, but it is based on Veda. Veda is Vidya, it is a way of knowledge, it is a science in the inner sense of a yogic science of consciousness. There has been debate, what kind of sciences did they have in ancient India? Did they have Vimanas? Are there sciences of any value? But the most important science in the history of the world, that is at the cutting edge of science today, whether it is biology or modern physics, has been best explained in the Hindu, Vedic, and Dharmic traditions, which is the science of consciousness. And consciousness is something that is beyond the mind. It is something that is beyond time and space. It is our true self that is universal in nature, Paramatma, Parabrahma. And this is extremely important because the Bharatiya tradition emphasized the exploration of all aspects of knowledge, but gave an emphasis to the inner knowledge also, which was generally neglected or forgotten in the Western world. So if we want to understand what is Hindu, we have to look at Dharma, Veda, and Vedanta. And it is a tradition that has universal value. Everyone by nature is born in these dharmic traditions. No one is born in any religion at all. There's no stamp on a baby that is born that says this is a Christian, this is a Hindu, this is a Muslim. This is what the families say. But we are all part of that same unitary reality, We are all part of that same consciousness. Now, at the same time, this universal teaching always requires a local adaptation according to time, place, person, culture, and community. And the Hindu Dharma has always had that, whether you go to Bali, whether you go throughout India, even the adaptation via the Buddhist traditions. Always we go to the actual living person and the direct experience of life and nature. We don't exclude the world of nature. When I look at a person, I always look at them first as an individual. I don't, they may belong to a certain community, but that is not the key thing. You have to look at them as an individual. That individual is the same individual. It is the same Purusha. It is the same Paramatma in a different expression relative to the body and the mind. So what this means is that there's this universal view of Hinduism, but there is also always a local Hindu identity. And there is a Hindu heritage. Hindu heritage is all the teachings of the rishis, the yogis, the shastras, all the different gurus and sampradayas from most ancient to modern times. And I don't like to use the term scriptures for any of the Hindu or Dharmic teachings. They are not literally the word of God that we have to blindly believe in. They are guidelines for right living and for a deeper understanding of ourselves. And that's why they provide many different options and many different points of view. There are already dozens of rishis in Rig Veda itself. And the main relationship with the divine is one of friendship, not one of fear and trembling and guilt. So we must remember these points. And that means there is what I would call Hindu identity. And Hindu identity is preserving and sharing these great traditions of Bharata and Hindu Dharma. We are engaged in Vedic education globally, so we also share all aspects of yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish, Vedanta, but also put it in the context of Vedic values, Vedic living, Vedic philosophy, and proper understanding of history relative to these traditions which have been historically ignored. For example, we have a concept of South Asia today instead of India or Bharat. There was never a country called South Asia. There is no clear geography of South Asia. There's no literature of South Asia. There's an Indian Ocean, Indo-Pacific, Indochina, Indonesia, expressing that influence overall. So what we have had globally is we've had the Hindu Dharma taught by non-Hindus and anti-Hindus. You will be hard to find a single practicing Hindu in departments of the Hindu religion in the West. And even in India, it is the Hindu apologetics, the anti-Hindu narrative that prevails. So our point here is that we need an inside the tradition view. And even though strangely I'm coming from another country, I try to present an inside the tradition view of the Hindu Dharma. And people say, oh, but that's a biased view. I say, how can it be less biased than an outside the tradition view? We have inside the tradition views for Christianity and Islam, even in India, but we don't have an inside tradition view of Hinduism that is honored the same way in academia and in the educational system. So we need that view because the Hindu Dharma is an experiential tradition. It is not a theory or a belief. It requires that we live a certain way, and it also requires that we connect to the universe as a whole. At the same time, I have a lot of trouble with this term that Hinduism is a way of life. It is a way of life, but so many things can be called a way of life. It is a way of conscious living. It is a way of yogic living. It is a way of living in harmony with the universe. but we cannot ignore its religious dimension. In the United States, for example, what do you tell Hindu children that their religion is? They have to fill out on forms if Hinduism is only a way of life. And as a religion in the Western world, the Hindu Dharma gains legal status for marriage, for temples, for education. A way of life that doesn't have that. And I'm sad to say that even at this Sabrimala issue, they're saying that because the Hindu Dharma is a way of life, we do not have to give it the denominational respect that we do Christianity and Islam, which are very clearly defined religions. So Hindu Dharma is a religion and much more. It is also a superlative way of life and cannot be simply identified or equated with any other way of life. It is also a wonderful system of art, music, dance, culture. It is also a wonderful system of science, philosophy, psychology, medicine, and also higher vidyas, understanding of karma, understanding of the influences of space, Vastu Shastra. It encompasses everything. And that is why it has been so difficult for the West to understand it. And one of the things we've been asking for is not Indology of any form, but a dialogue between civilizations. India, Bharat, is a great dharmic civilization, arguably the greatest civilization in the world, at least at a spiritual level. Certainly the most enduring, and people could say, okay, India's been invaded and conquered so many times. India is the most enduring civilization in the world. It preserves traditions of 5,000 years old today, when Egypt, Babylonia, Greece, and Rome, and Persia, Iran, went down many centuries ago. You have never been defeated. You have only been controlled or subverted a bit. Your traditions have survived the movement of time. And since Swami Vivekananda, they have also been spreading globally. And a lot of the main discoveries, or a lot of the main new ideas in Western science and medicine, have a Hindu basis or Hindu correlation, whether it's the use of meditation in psychology, or pranayama in healing, or mantra for improving memory, or the idea of the relativity of time and space, or the idea that there is a universal consciousness behind everything. These have all been long pioneered in the Vedic and the Vedantic thought. And I think we can easily say that this thought is dominating the most enlightened minds in the world, and will continue to inspire, expand, and guide humanity for centuries to come. At the same time, it needs to be recognized for its Hindu and Vedic and yogic roots in Bharat. And also, the people here in India have to honor and be proud of these traditions, share them, own them, not in an exclusive way, but recognizing, yes, this is what Yajnavalkya said, or this is what Vasishta said, this is Ram, this is Krishna, and so forth. And the Hindu narrative has always gone on. We have Vedas, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Puranas, Yoga Shastras, Vedantic Shastras, so many things. These stories are still told today. These ideas are still going on today. And I feel the most important statement to make for reclaiming Hindu identity, for reclaiming Bharatiya identity, and for creating a true idea or view of India that honors its ancient heritage up to the present day as a global heritage, is to get this Ram temple built in Ayodhya. Because how can you have a country that is still keeping in exile its most famous hero, sage, and subject of its oldest literature? and that has spread throughout Asia. All these other countries have Ramayanas, and yet they cannot go back to Ayodhya and experience Ram Janmabhoomi because it wasn't politically correct for the British, and if it's not politically correct for the British, it shouldn't be politically correct for modern India as well. And then I also have to just make a statement on the judiciary. Hindu temples should be honored as sacred. Hindu temples at least should be a national or even to some extent a global heritage. No other country, civilization has the diversity of temples, sculpture, architecture, forms, music, dance goes along with them, shastras, teachings in such a great variety. They have tremendous variety. Do not reduce that to a uniform code. Modern political correctness should not be made the judge of Hindu temples and how they function. That political correctness may change tomorrow and be politically incorrect. And as has already been said, the courts in India have no right interfering with the Hindu worship. And it happens in no other country in the world. I ask anyone to give a legal precedent for any court in Europe or the United States interfering with religious matters of whether it is Hindus or Christians or Muslims or telling or in getting involved with the running of their institutions, and even more so, taking their revenues. It's the opposite. In the West, certain tax benefits and even money is given to religious institutions to aid in their functioning. The revenues are not taken away. That only happens in the Indian context. It has nothing to do with secular law. No other secular country has that type of law code. And India is the only country in which the majority religion is taxed and restricted by the government and the courts. Of course, it doesn't happen in any Islamic country, you can be certain. It also doesn't happen in Christian countries. Even the United States, which is a very secular country, very much protects the Christian religion and also protects the Christian missionaries operative in India itself and make sure that they're not only treated well, that they might even get special privileges also. So this idea that in India that the majority religion should not be supported because it's tyranny over the minority, what is democracy is rule of the majority. So otherwise you've taken the Hindus who were under oppression of foreign rule because they were not in power, and you're saying now because they're in power, because they're majority, they can't have. And again, we're not asking for special privileges. We're asking for unity under the law and non-interference with any Hindu institutions. And in the education of India, I also have put up the point, all the schools should teach the great books of Bharat. This includes Vedas, Mahabharata, Ramayana. You can't maybe teach all of them, but at least the main stories, the main teachings, as a national heritage. If you say, oh, these are religious books, they can't be taught, then really almost nothing coming out of India can be taught. Even Kalidas you can teach because it's, it's Kumara Sambhava. It's not just like Shakespeare, your simply human type poetry. And I also hold that all the intellectuals of Bharat, if they want to be called an Indian or Bharatiya intellectual, have to at least learn and know the fundamentals of the Vedanta. Merely knowing Karl Marx will not help you understand India at all. In fact, Karl Marx was against India. He was a colonizer. He wanted European civilization to prevail in a slightly different form. They talk about the saffronization of education. Yes, let's please do it. And we need to get the red out of the education. If we change the red a little bit, we can turn it into saffron. We don't need to bow down before and Russia now has an education that honors the czars and the Russian tradition, and even Putin goes to the Russian Orthodox Church. China is opening Confucian schools throughout the world, and supposedly they're a communist country. They are Chinese first and communist second. Indian Marxists are communist first and Indians perhaps not at all. So why not Vedic schools? Why not Vedantic schools? We started with the International Yoga Day, and you can see what a success that was. And yoga is part of the Hindu tradition, the Hindu heritage. It is spread in various ways, but we must honor its roots and maintain its traditions. So the other aspects, the Sanskrit, the music, the dance, but also Veda, Vedanta, not simply as, on all levels, as academically, as educationally, but also as spiritual paths and practices. If we look at the profile of the people in the West who practice yoga involved with Vedanta and Vedic studies, they are generally the most affluent in education and educated of the society, just as the Hindus in the United States and UK are the most affluent and educated of the people there. So the new Hindu narrative is emerging, and it is now taking its decisive turn. In India today, we now have a very curious situation where political leaders and political parties that a few years ago were ashamed to be Hindus. I remember being in India in the 80s and 90s. No political leader would ever call himself a Hindu, and they wouldn't highlight going to Hindu pilgrimage. The educational realm to say, I am a Hindu, then they would say, I'm a Hindu, but I follow all other religions as well. It was an apologetic statement. Now we have political leaders who don't even, whose even family heritage, we don't know exactly what it is, claim to be proud Hindus. But proud Hindus only for a certain way, and saying who is a good Hindu and who is a bad Hindu. The people who were previously not accepting to become Hindus are now telling us who is a good Hindu and who is a bad Hindu. And unfortunately, those who were previously calling themselves Hindus when it wasn't politically fashionable are now called bad Hindus. So this is our reality. And at the same time, the Hindu Dharma has come up. Modi has done that because he brought out this idea of being a Hindu publicly, going to Kashi, going to all these other places, honoring the Hindu Dharma. Honoring Hindu Dharma is not sectarian. It is simply honoring the heritage of Bharat and all the rest of Bharat. How am I doing on time? Okay. So we are reclaiming the Hindu narrative. We are spreading it globally. We need to integrate all the factors so people cannot say, oh, yoga, I follow yoga, but it's not Hindu. You don't have to be a Hindu to practice yoga, but don't say yoga is not Hindu. Patanjali in Yoga Sutras was one of the Shadarshanas, the 6 schools of the Vedic philosophy. He accepted the philosophy of Vedas, Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita. The main text on yoga is Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is Yogavatara. Shiva is Yogavatara, but he's also Yogeshwar. He's also Mahayogi, Adiyogi. So this yoga tradition and Hindu tradition are not different. As I say, Veda is the knowledge and yoga is the practice. Not simply as asana, but bhakti yoga, karma yoga, jnana yoga, all these different and related traditions. Our way of life should be yoga. Politicians should follow dharmic values and lead lives of karma yoga, or we should start questioning them. And we also must recognize that in India, dharmic values should be taught in the schools. They are universal, ahimsa, satya, and so forth. We don't have to say God said. These are universal laws and principles. You need to embrace your heritage. Hindu Dharma is the most open, the most pluralistic, and the most accepting, but that doesn't mean it blindly accepts everything. And here I would like to close with emphasizing the principle of viveka. Viveka is the essence of the Hindu Dharma. Discernment, discrimination between truth and false, being and non-being, the eternal, the transient, the real, the unreal. We need just as much viveka in spirituality and religion as we do in science, in business, in jobs, in medicine. We can say all spiritual, all yogic teachings. We can certainly not say that all religions are the same. There are different teachings. People should be free to follow whatever path that they wish, but each path has a consequence, and they don't lead all to the same place. If a patient comes in, we can't say all medicines are the same, and you just go to the medical shelf, take whatever medicine you want, you will be cured. Some of these medicines may, of course, poison people. So that viveka is necessary. Let us bring it into education. Let us bring it into the media. And of course, we need, and here I must make a point, do not rely upon the government or the media to tell you or to educate your children. Educate your children in the Hindu Dharma starting when they're very young, by how you live, by taking them to temples, by bringing them to acharyas and so forth. And take the Hindu Dharma back to its true essence and higher knowledge and deeper culture. You had the most beautiful artistic culture here in the world. You had the most sophisticated refinement, as well as the highest spiritual knowledge. That is the Sanatana Dharma. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha.
I took up the mic not to remind Acharya Frawley of the time, but I took up the mic. You must have noticed when he was talking about Indian judiciary and traditions. I just wanted to reassure him that we'll all stand by him if he faces contempt sometime in the future. But I think we are living through very difficult times, because if you protest the release of those who want to break India apart, if the Tukde gang members get released and someone protests, he's slapped with a contempt. So I'll not say anything beyond this, but we are living in difficult times. I think there's one introduction about Acharya Frawley that I would like to really give. And I think most of you may be aware, and I just want to really flag that he is the intellectual heir, the philosophical heir, the spiritual heir of two personalities that we extremely admire, and on whom we have actually based the entire reclamation of the Hindu narrative, and that is Sitaram Goel and Ram Swarup. And I think, and I was discussing here on the table that when I sit with him, there's nothing much that I can say, because I have been reading him. I've been reading Ram Swarup and Sitaram Goel, many of us have, and he's exactly saying what they say, and we want to say what they say. Therefore, I think perhaps every lit fest that is organized by our kind of people must have a session dedicated to Ram Swarup and Sitaram Goel. I think that should be mandatory, because what happens is in Jaipur and Bangalore only good Hindus go. We have no place there. Now there is a new terminology with good Hindus, career nationalists. That is also a new breed which is coming up, that I am a career nationalist. So we are not career nationalists, we are not good Hindus. We fall in the category of bad Hindus, as he rightly said, because we would speak of Hindu-ness when it was not fashionable. And so that's why I think every lit fest must have a session dedicated to these two thinkers of modern India, precisely because they have spent an entire lifetime trying to reclaim the Hindu narrative, the topic of this session. And we need to extract from him as much as we can, because he's essentially perpetuating that narrative. He's essentially perpetuating the ideas of those two personalities who have no space in the Indian academia today. Now, I just want to really make a few observations. Reclaiming the Hindu narrative. So let us first identify what are the challenges to that reclamation. And I think the challenges emanate from about, I think, 3/4. All of us know this, but I'm just reiterating it. Many of you have taken on a lot, faced a lot of abuse. Shefali is here. She's every day at the receiving end of certain very elite sections. So the reclamation of the Hindu narrative is essentially opposed by evangelical Christianity, Islamic fundamentalism, and the communist and Maoist narrative. The Tukde gang or the Break India forces. So therefore, we also have to think that in our reclamation of the Hindu narrative, how do we essentially handle these challenges emanating from these 3/4? Now, very interestingly, Girilal Jain, he's another writer that we must really rediscover. In his Hindu Phenomenon, speaks of secular nationalism. Sitaram Goel speaks of positive nationalism. Secular nationalism refuses to base itself or to re-articulate the Bharatiya traditions in its narrative of nationalism, and Sitaram Goel's positive nationalism speaks about the inherent necessity of including our dharmic traditions in our articulation of nationalism. Now, what has happened is, you'll see something very interesting which is happening. That is, when we started talking about nationalism, you suddenly had this booklet produced by Romila Thapar with big N, where they started saying, we are also nationalists. And this is the kind of nationalism that we are espousing. So good. Like, there are now, and of course I want to make a point which is not politically correct, but let me make it. What has happened is the certain mainstream political parties, or rather one mainstream political party, whose past leaders have been identified with Indian nationalism, or who have been identified with breaking apart Pakistan, these certain political parties are now actually siding with forces who want to break apart India, not Pakistan. And therefore, those mainstream political parties are pushing a narrative of subterfuge and subversion. And as a result, as a corollary, they have become one of the prime challenges to the reclamation of the Hindu narrative. They have positioned themselves like that. So that is why at the drop of a hat, you see them jumping on to crossing the JNU wall and standing by those who wanted to break apart India, making at least calls for them. Their heart bleeds for, there's an entire session on that, their heart bleeds for urban Naxals. Their heart also secretly bleeds for rural Naxals also. And this is the kind of narrative of subversion that they are pushing, and that is what is extremely challenging and dangerous, because when you have a mainstream political party pushing a narrative of subversion, I think that becomes extremely challenging. And you'll see it's very interesting that they have no position. They have no position on the Sabrimala issue. They have no control, or they have no position on whether the Ram Mandir must be built or not. They have a position, but they don't articulate a public position on it. And in fact, it burned them no end to see a 182 meters statue of unity dedicated to Sardar Patel. Because I think what Sardar Patel signified, and I'll tell you why I am saying this, what Sardar Patel essentially signified post-independence was all right. You know, the uniting of India, and he did all that. Strengthening the administration, strengthening the steel frame, laying down a certain framework of governance. Sardar Patel did all that. But to my mind, what made Sardar Patel's contribution unique was the support he gave to the rebuilding, reconstruction of Somnath right after independence. And he turned it into a public endeavor. There was somebody was engaging me on Twitter. I normally don't engage. Somebody was engaging saying that, Gandhiji had said the government of India must not build the temple. It should be a public endeavor. There's nothing wrong with that. But the fact is that Sardar Patel and K.M. Munshi, another forgotten figure, who's very difficult for the Marxists to handle, Sardar Patel and K.M. Munshi saw it as clear as daylight that the reconstruction of Somnath temple was necessary to instill in the Hindu mind that they are free at last. And until that was done, until this flag, the saffron flag fluttered again on the top of the newly reconstructed Somnath temple, Sardar was very clear that the Hindus would not feel the essence of freedom. Now there was an entire debate which took place that whether we should preserve that temple as it is, the temple which was turned into a half mosque. There's this 1895 photograph from the British archives which shows the entire dome on the mosque and whitewashed and all that. Sardar said there's nothing doing, just demolish that, because it's not a temple anymore. The spirit has left. The spirit of worship, of dedication has totally left that place. Demolish it. And in its place, what we would say, build a Bhavya Mandir dedicated to Lord Shiva. And what did Nehru do? In the cabinet, Nehru told K.M. Munshi, your effort at reconstructing the Somnath temple smacks of Hindu revivalism. And Sardar Patel and K.M. Munshi gave an answer to him, and I think that's a beautiful letter you must all read. He says that no amount of your all this that you want to do, build up modern temples, etc., etc., is going to really touch the core unless this temple is built. So I think, and of course you know that Sardar Patel, that Nehru opposed the construction of the temple, he opposed the consecration of the temple, and in spite of that it was created. So I think the Somnath, the reconstruction of the Somnath temple has very important lessons for us. In the Hindu psyche, it was a first step towards reclaiming the narrative. And obviously, as a corollary today, the temple must stand at Ayodhya. And I think again, there's a suggestion that every LitFest that we organize should start, every session must start with a Jai Shri Ram also. Because reclaiming the Hindu narrative can never be done without reclaiming your sacred spaces. And I think that is the challenge. And it is this reclamation of your sacred spaces is what is anathema to these three quarters. Unless that reclamation of those sacred spaces, I mean, you can do two things. For example, one is obviously, as Acharya Frawley has wonderfully put it, that you have institutions, and in fact, Ram Swarupji has made really about, I think, 18 points where he discusses how the Hindu narrative needs to be reclaimed. The revitalization of that entire ecosystem around temples, the reclamation of our temple spaces, establishing of institutions which would fully focus on interpretation and articulation of Indian traditions, of Bharatiya traditions. There are a number of such K.M. Munshi, and I mentioned K.M. Munshi, K.M. Munshi's anathema is very difficult to handle for the Marxists because he founded the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan. A full-time politician who was extremely prolific in his writing also went on to found the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan as it was at that point of time, not the replica or the watered down version that it is today in some quarters. And through the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, K.M. Munshi produced some of the most seminal work. The entire history of the freedom movement, the entire history of the people and culture of India, edited by Ramesh Majumdar, R.C. Majumdar, was K.M. Munshi's brainchild. He did that. So the best thing was to debunk all that and say that, these people have no place. So, and that's why Irfan Habib, even if you engage with him, the first thing he says that you're not a historian, so don't speak. But there was a time when you need not have to be a professional historian or a card-carrying member of the Communist Party who has transmuted into a historian in order to write history. The history of the Dharma Shastra was not written by a professional historian. So all these are shibboleths and positions which came later on, especially during the 70s, when the children of Nurul Hasan started actually controlling the academic discourse in India, and then started evolving political positions where gradually you had this entire gamut, starting from Jadunath Sarkar to R.C. Majumdar to Nilakanta Shastri, and you name anyone, who were totally marginalized and removed. Shyama Prasad Mukherjee's legacy also faces the same. I mean, obviously there are large swathes of India where people do not know what Shyama Prasad Mukherjee has done. What he has done for India's unity, what the huge contribution he made by saving a portion of Bengal and retaining it in India. Otherwise, all of us would have been in a state of perpetual, movement, being perpetual refugees. So these were narratives. So therefore, reclamation of sacred space, reclamation of icons is an extremely important step in reclamation of the Hindu narrative. So anyway, I think I can just go on and on, but we have 15 minutes. We have a way we can, 1 o'clock, when do we end? We end now? Oh, we are already late? But then they can maybe have some questions? Yes, please. So I think we should all take advantage of Acharya Frawley's presence. And if there's any questions, we can keep one question. One.
See,
we'll cut short for one question,
talk
sir.
About all Hindus, but we have enough monsters among Hindus as well, idiots and things like that. We are the most indisciplined people. I mean, why our kind of scriptures and this kind of talk doesn't direct these things to our population to be more disciplined, more law-abiding, more conscious of their duties?
Is there a question there?
Question.
Yes. The question is why our scriptures or our interlocutors in the public space addresses these things.
If you look at your scriptures or teachings, they teach the Dharma, yamas, niyamas. They do not teach distortion. They do not teach all this disorganization. They do not teach incompetence, any of those things. Those are things that people may do, which you won't find in the Bhagavad Gita, you won't find that in the Yoga Shastras, you won't find that in the Vedas. You will find the teaching of Dharma and respect and duty and right action on all levels of life.
Namaste. Either of you can answer this.
Okay. Can we have the discussion? We'll continue the discussion.
Yeah. So this question, is prompted from something that Vamadevaji mentioned. It's about the dialogue between Hinduism and Abrahamic faiths. My question is more fundamental. Is that even really possible, because it is like a dialogue between a predator and a prey?
Yes.
And assuming that it's possible, it should result in some kind of a positive outcome, and I really don't foresee that because if it hasn't happened throughout prolonged history, I don't foresee that happening in future. Do you share my skepticism? And I would like to hear both of your thoughts.
What I emphasized was a dialogue between civilizations. And that only can occur when Western civilization recognizes that India is a civilization in its own right, with its own values, and cannot be measured and judged by the concepts and terminology and history of the West. Then we can have a real dialogue. Dialogue between religions is something else. And I don't like this concept of interfaith dialogue, because in faith you believe in something, often something irrational, virgin birth, final prophet. In interfaith, you agree to accept everybody's irrational faith. Even one of them is not enough. So there needs to be, I would say, interknowledge. There needs to be dialogue and discussion, but like in science, open for the discovery of truth at an experiential level, not just simply representatives of different religious businesses giving their point of view and their motives for joining them. So that is what we need, and we need a Hindu critique of the Abrahamic religions, which is what Ram Swarup brought about, because they have very different types of views and understanding of consciousness, states of consciousness, as part of the study of religion. And one final slightly different point, both Sitaram Goel and Ram Swarup were very much inspired by Sri Aurobindo. And we too have also been very much inspired by Sri Aurobindo. So his work is also very important, and also going back to Vivekananda, Adi Shankara, and so forth. It is a continual tradition. And the Vedantic Acharyas supported the Hindu Dharma. Swami Vidyaranya started this whole Vijayanagar empire. So that part of the narrative needs to go on. But we need discussion and debate, not just this acceptance of the Abrahamic model as the true model. Abrahamic model is not a model of self-realization. They do not have a concept of karma and rebirth. They don't have the sadhanas we have. They don't have the understanding of states of consciousness, different lokas of the universe. And to reach heaven in Christianity or Islam, you need a physical body, because it is a physical world. It is not the transcendent states that we have.
You see, I think what we have been, some of us have been pushing, is that we need to have a civilizational grand narrative first, a dharmic narrative, civilizational grand narrative, and look at ourselves as a civilizational state. In Lok Manthan, I had given the parameters, 8 parameters. The Chinese are very clear that they are a civilizational state, and they have evolved certain framework and parameters. We too are a civilizational state. It is just that post-independence, there was a political structure and order which promoted self-alienation, and self-repudiation. And that's where Ram Swarup ji says, Atmas Smriti was, we got Atmas Vismrita. And therefore what is required is that re-articulation, understanding of that, that self-rootedness through various activities. Shefali came here yesterday, she went around, so she gave us photographs of the temples, something about the temples, about the food, about this. That bit adds up to this entire effort that all of us are gathered here for trying to to a certain degree rediscover that rootedness. We read S.L. Bhairappa to rediscover that rootedness. We keep doing that. So I think all these efforts must evolve into that ecosystem, and that ecosystem has to evolve beyond official India. It has to evolve beyond also official patronage. Official patronage is obviously very welcome, because the communist ecosystem was built from USSR and from the official patronage that Congress gave them over 40 years. So Ram Swarup ji calls it the dominance of a satellite ideology perpetuated through proxies. So we have to actually, and that satellite ideology continues to be here long after the mothership has exploded. And the proxies are today supported by certain political dispensations, and so they continue to survive. So we have to identify the proxies. We have to decimate, liquidate them intellectually and politically, and then really sweep through with our new narrative. And that is why the churning is taking place today. Many things are happening, many things are not happening. And obviously, efforts such as this, the Pondy Lit Fest, the Mangalore Lit Fest, are signs that that great churning is now acquiring a certain direction. Otherwise, the established Lit Fest have only two things. They perpetuate the bash Hindu narrative, bash Modi narrative. They have no other agenda. They have no other dimension. So this is what I really wanted to say. Yeah. I think they are now asking us to stop. Maybe we can have the discussion after this, perhaps. I think we have overshot the time.
Thank you, everyone. We are extremely sorry, but due to lack of time, we'll end the question and answer session here. That was a very thought-provoking session, and I think it asserts the fact that we all have to be active Hindus and not the passive participants in our religion. I request Mrs. Sandhya Pai to hand over a memento to Padma Bhushan Dr. David Frawley. I also request Mrs. Malvika Avinash onto the dais to hand over the memento of token to Dr. Anirban Ganguly. Thank you, everyone. We'll start the next session in next 5 minutes.